I was 52 when I first felt the weight of his gaze. A moment too long, a fraction too tender, stirring something in me I had long buried. The office was a labyrinth of glass and steel, a place where ambition and routine collided in the hum of keyboards, the clatter of coffee cups, and the muted buzz of corporate life. I, Evelyn Carter, had carved out a quiet, respectable place here as a senior analyst, my days filled with reports, meetings, and the steady rhythm of diligence that had defined my 30-year career. My life outside the office was equally predictable. Dinners with David, my husband of 32 years, visits from our daughter, Claire, now a mother herself, and the occasional gathering with friends who spoke of their grandchildren or their ailments. David was a good man, steady as the oak table in our dining room, his kindness a constant in a world that often felt fleeting. But our love, once afire, had softened into something comfortable, like a quilt worn thin by time. I had never been a woman to chase dreams. My youth was spent building a career, a family, a life that others called admirable. I had been a girl once, scribbling poetry in notebooks, dreaming of a life filled with passion and possibility. But those dreams had been set aside for practicality. I chose David, a man whose quiet strength promised stability, and together we built a life that was solid, if unremarkable. Claire was our joy, her laughter the heartbeat of our home, but she had grown and moved on, leaving us with a house that felt too large, too quiet. In the stillness, I began to feel a restlessness, a longing for something I couldn't name, a hunger that gnawed at the edges of my contentment. It was in this state, this half-buried unease, that I first noticed Edward Langley, the director of our department. At 58, Edward was a man who commanded attention without effort. His silver-threaded hair and tailored suits gave him a distinguished air, but it was his voice, low, measured, with a warmth that made you lean in, that drew me. He was married to Margaret, a woman whose elegance was the stuff of office whispers, her charity galas, and impeccable grace a fixture in local papers. I had seen her once at a company fundraiser, her laughter bright as she rested a hand on Edward's arm. They were a portrait of a life well built, their marriage a monument to shared triumphs. I envied them, not for their wealth or status, but for the way they seemed to belong to each other, unshakable. It began with a glance, so fleeting, I convinced myself it was nothing. We were in a meeting, the conference room thick with the drone of projections and deadlines, and I looked up to find his eyes on me. Not the cursory glance of a superior, but something softer, more searching, as if he saw beyond the analyst to the woman beneath. My breath caught, and I looked away, my cheeks burning with a shame I didn't yet understand. I was a married woman, a mother, a professional. Such thoughts were not mine to entertain. But my heart, that traitor, had already begun to stir. The weeks that followed were a slow descent into a world I didn't recognize. I became hyper-aware of Edward, my senses attuned to his presence in a way that felt both thrilling and wrong. I noticed the smallest details, the way his cufflinks glinted under the office lights, the faint scent of his cologne, cedar and citrus, that lingered in the elevator after he stepped out, the slight crease in his brow when he was deep in thought. Each observation was a secret I hoarded, a treasure I buried deep within myself. I hated the way my pulse quickened when he entered a room, the way my thoughts strayed to him in the quiet moments of my day, while folding laundry, while stirring soup, while lying beside David in the dark. I was not this woman, I told myself. I was Evelyn, steadfast and loyal, not some fool chasing a forbidden spark. Yet, the spark grew. It was in the late evenings, when the office emptied and we found ourselves working side by side, that the boundaries began to blur. One such night, as the city lights painted streaks of gold across the windows, we stayed late to finalize a project timeline. The silence between us was comfortable, broken only by the rustle of papers and the hum of the air conditioning. He asked me about my work, not the numbers or the deadlines, but my thoughts, my perspective. I spoke freely, my words unfiltered, and for the first time in years, I felt seen, not as the analyst, not as David's wife, but as Evelyn, a woman with dreams and fears and a heart that still yearned. His attention was a warmth I hadn't known I craved. When he smiled, it was as if the years fell away and I was young again, alive with possibility. I left that night with my coat clutched tightly around me, my mind a tangle of guilt and exhilaration. In the car, I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard as if it could absolve me. David was waiting at home, his slippers by the door, his predictable kindness a reminder of the life I had chosen. I whispered to myself that it was nothing, that I would bury this feeling and move on. But the heart is a stubborn thing, and mine refused to let go. The months that followed were a dance of restraint and surrender. I tried to avoid him, taking different routes to the break room, burying myself in work to drown out the thoughts that plagued me. But Edward was everywhere, in the meetings where his voice anchored the room, in the hallways where his footsteps echoed, in the fleeting moments when our eyes met and the world seemed to pause. Once, during a team presentation, he handed me a file, and his fingers brushed mine, a touch so brief it might have been accidental. My skin burned where he had touched me, and I spent the rest of the day replaying the moment, ashamed of the thrill it brought. I knew he felt it too. There was a hesitation in his movements, a careful distance he maintained, as if he, too, was wrestling with something unspoken. In meetings, I would catch him watching me, his gaze lingering a moment too long before he looked away. Once, in the crowded office kitchen, we reached for the same coffee pot, and our hands froze, inches apart. The air between us crackled, and I mumbled an apology, retreating with my mug before I could betray myself further. Each encounter was a thread in a tapestry we were weaving, a secret we shared without ever speaking it aloud. My marriage, once a refuge, began to feel like a cage. David was as kind as ever, his routines unchanged, but I found myself withdrawing, my thoughts consumed by Edward. I would sit across from David at dinner, nodding as he spoke of his day, while my mind wandered to the office, to the man who made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. The guilt was a constant weight, a stone in my chest that grew heavier with each passing day. I loved David, I did, but it was a love tempered by time, a love that had settled into the grooves of habit. With Edward, there was no habit, only a raw, reckless hunger that terrified me. I began to revisit my past, searching for the moment when I had lost myself. I remembered the girl I had been, the one who wrote poetry under the oak tree in her parents' yard, who dreamed of a life filled with passion and meaning. That girl had chosen David, drawn to his steadiness, his promise of a life without chaos. We had been happy once, hadn't we? I thought of our early years, the way we danced in the kitchen to old records, the way he held me when Claire was born. Those memories were real, but they felt distant, like photographs in a dusty album. Edward, with his quiet intensity, had awakened something in me, a reminder of the woman I might have been. The office became both my sanctuary and my prison. I threw myself into my work, hoping to drown out the longing, but every task was colored by Edward's presence. I began to notice the way my colleagues spoke of him, his fairness, his vision, his ability to make people feel valued. I envied their ease, their ability to admire him without the torment that consumed me. My friend Susan, a fellow analyst with a laugh like a bell, would tease me about my diligence, unaware of the storm within me. "You're too serious, Evelyn," she'd say, her eyes crinkling with warmth. I smiled, deflecting, but her words cut deep. I was serious, yes, but not for the reasons she thought. The turning point came on a business trip to Chicago, a routine assignment that felt anything but. We were sent to meet a client, just the two of us, and the weight of our unspoken feelings hung over every moment. The hotel was a sleek monument of marble and glass, its dim lighting casting shadows that seemed to mirror the secrets we carried. After a long day of negotiations, we found ourselves at the hotel bar, the clink of glasses and soft jazz filling the space between us. He spoke of his childhood, of a boy who had dreamed of painting before duty called him to a life of boardrooms and budgets. His voice was low, intimate, and I listened, captivated, my heart swelling with a tenderness I knew I had no right to feel. When he asked about me, I spoke of Claire, of the garden I tended with care, of the small joys that anchored my days. I spoke of my youth, of the girl who had wanted to write poetry but chose stability instead. I told him about the summer I spent traveling through Europe, my only taste of adventure, before I settled into the life I now led. I didn't mention David, and he didn't mention Margaret. It was as if, for that moment, we existed outside of our lives, two souls unburdened by vows or consequences. The wine loosened my guard, and I laughed more freely than I had in years. My cheeks flushed with a warmth that was equal parts alcohol and desire. As we walked back to our rooms, the elevator ride was a study in silence, the air thick with what we wouldn't say. At my door, he paused, his hand hovering near mine, not touching, but close enough that I felt the heat of him. His eyes searched mine, and I saw in them a mirror of my own longing, my own guilt. I wanted to invite him in, to let the world fall away and surrender to the pull that had haunted me for months. My hand trembled on the doorknob, my breath shallow, but I couldn't. I whispered goodnight, my voice barely audible, and closed the door before I could change my mind. Alone in my room, I sank to the floor, my back against the door, tears burning my eyes. I wept for what I wanted, for what I couldn't have, for the woman I had become. Back at the office, we retreated into a fragile professionalism, our interactions clipped and formal. But the undercurrent remained, a silent ache that colored every moment. I would see him in the hallway, his head bent over a document, and my chest would tighten with a mix of relief and despair. I began to avoid him more deliberately, volunteering for projects that kept me out of his orbit, arriving early to avoid chance encounters in the elevator. Yet, the more I tried to bury my feelings, the more they clawed their way to the surface, a tide I couldn't hold back. One afternoon, I found a note on my desk, slipped beneath a stack of reports. It was in his handwriting, simple and unadorned. "I'm sorry if I've made things difficult. I never meant to." There was no signature, but I knew it was from him. I sat there, the office empty around me, the note trembling in my hands. I wanted to find him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, that I was just as guilty, that I didn't know how to stop wanting him. But I didn't. I folded the note and tucked it into my purse, a keepsake of a love that could never be. That night, I burned it in the fireplace at home, watching the flames consume the evidence of my heart's rebellion. David was asleep upstairs, unaware of the war I was fighting within myself. The seasons changed, and with them, the intensity of my feelings dulled, though they never vanished entirely. I threw myself into my work, into my garden, into the small rituals that tethered me to my life. I began to spend more time with Claire and her children, their laughter a balm for my wounded heart. My granddaughter, Lily, with her wide eyes and endless questions, reminded me of the girl I had been, the one who believed in possibilities. I clung to those moments, hoping they would anchor me, but Edward's shadow lingered, a quiet ache that surfaced in the stillness. I began to notice changes in myself, subtle but undeniable. I took more care with my appearance, choosing dresses that flattered my figure, lingering over my reflection in a way I hadn't in years. I told myself it was for me, for my confidence, but deep down, I knew it was for him, for the chance that he might notice. The guilt of this vanity was another layer in my torment, a reminder of how far I had strayed from the woman I thought I was. A year later, Edward was promoted and transferred to a branch on the West Coast. The news came in a company-wide email, professional and impersonal, but it hit me like a blow. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, my hands cold. He was leaving, and with him, the temptation that had nearly undone me. At his farewell party, I stood on the fringes, a glass of wine in my hand, watching as Margaret stood by his side, her smile radiant. He looked at me once, a fleeting glance that held something, regret, perhaps, or relief. I smiled back, a polite, empty gesture, and turned away, my heart a tangle of grief and gratitude. The office felt emptier without him, the hallways quieter, the air less charged. I told myself it was for the best, that his absence would free me from the prison of my own making. But freedom came at a cost. I missed him, not just the man, but the version of myself I had glimpsed in his presence, the woman who felt alive, who dared to want more. I carried that loss quietly, a private mourning no one could see. Now, at 56, I sit in my garden, the roses blooming in defiant bursts of color. David is inside, reading the paper, his presence a quiet comfort. Claire visits with her children, their laughter filling the house with a joy that anchors me. I have taken up painting, a hobby I hadn't touched since my youth, and the act of brushing color onto canvas feels like a reclamation of the girl I once was. My paintings are simple: landscapes, flowers, the curve of a river, but they are mine, a small rebellion against the life I chose. I think of Edward sometimes, wondering if he too feels the echo of what might have been. I imagine him in his new city, his life unfolding in ways I'll never know. I wonder if he keeps a secret of his own, a memory of the woman he almost loved. The note he left me is gone, but its words linger, a reminder of the line we never crossed. I don't hate myself anymore. I've made peace with my heart's quiet rebellion, with the truth that love, even the wrong kind, can make you feel alive, if only for a moment. I choose David, our life, the steady rhythm of our days. But I carry Edward with me, a scar hidden beneath the surface, a testament to the woman I was and the woman I chose to be. The roses sway in the breeze, their petals soft against my fingers, and I let the memory of him fade, a bittersweet ache I'll carry to my grave. Life moves on, as it always does, and I move with it, a woman shaped by love, by loss, by the choices that define us.